The following presentation is brought to you by kmmedia.pro. Please visit kmmedia.pro for more information. Now stay right where you are as we present Welcome to Positive Talk Radio, evolving ideas, one conversation at a time. Great guests, dynamic stories and interviews, plus new thoughts on a wide range of topics and concepts. I hope that you'll hang with me, Kevin McDonald, my friends, and of course, you. As together we work to understand why we are all here and what we can do to make our world a better place for all of us. To be happy, be kind, and live in peace together. Yep, that's Positive Talk Radio. Everybody to another episode of Positive Talk Radio. My name is Kevin McDonald, and today we have a great guest, and he only put his first name up there, but I believe your last name is Lewis, correct?
Yes.
Yes, David Lewis is our guest today, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it said enter your name, but then it already had like a fill in, so I put in the name, and I didn't even think about that.
That's quite all right. I should know these things. I'm a professional in the business, you know. And but in any event, he is a financial planner and a financial analyst, and he works with insurance to help you get through some of the stuff. And so I wanted to have him on because we are now in the middle of a very interesting period of time that I don't know that anybody really knows. You know, there are lots of theories, but I don't think anybody really knows what actually the heck is going on. So I wanted to have him on because it's his job to know what's going on. But, you know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, hell, I don't know. You know, we'll have to wait to see what tomorrow brings. But so David Lewis is our guest. Welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for having me back on the show. It's nice to talk to you again.
Well, it's apropos that we have you on now because had we had you on in December, we would have been in a wholly different place than we are today because the stock market is now. Is it officially in bear territory all across the board?
I mean, it depends on who you talk to. But I mean, that's what if you're reading the negative news headlines, then they'll say, yeah, we're in bear market territory.
And what does that mean exactly?
You know, it's one of those weird. I mean, I'm sure my expertise is in the life insurance industry, and so I don't do a lot with the stock market, oddly enough. But it's actually bled so far over into the insurance industry that that a lot of people that are in the insurance business have been paying a lot more. Usually with stuff that goes on in the stock market, we're like, I don't care. That's not really what I worry about unless, you know, an agent happens to be working with, you know, variable annuities or, you know, in the pension plan space or something like that. But, you know, so it's almost like what we're seeing today is something that we really haven't seen since like 2008.
Right.
And I think that's kind of freaking people out. I mean, it's not gotten that bad, but people are talking about how this could be worse than, you know, 2008.
Well, and the only difference between, as far as I can tell, between now and 2008 was the housing bubble, which caused a great deal of the problem in 2008 with the amount of foreclosures and people not being able to pay their mortgages and stuff, which doesn't seem to be the case right now because houses still are, you know, it's not going up like it was, but there's the housing market still seems to be solid. It doesn't look like there's going to be a rash of foreclosures, at least not yet. But there's a whole different dynamic that's going on with where it comes into, you know, we have an older population now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of people that are in pension funds, in 401ks, and a lot of that stuff is tied to the stock market.
Yeah.
And the stock market is going down and down and down. It's and no one seems to be able to know when it's going to stop. It's like being on a merry-go-round and you don't know when it's going to stop.
Yeah. So, I mean, we live in interesting times, right? I mean, that's maybe interesting is not the word that most people would use for what's going on right now. To speak to the mortgage market is interesting because there are a lot of narratives, a lot of like sacred cows or whatever you want to call them, that are just being smashed. One of those, I mean, and we could probably talk for hours about this, right? The idea that on the long-term stock markets always go up. This is sort of like, back in 2008, I started in the business in 2004. And back then I did do more with investments, with mutual funds and variable contracts and stuff like that. And one of the things that we would talk about back then is in the 2004, 2005, 2006 was how great the market was doing, and all the way up 2004, 5, 6, 7, things were going very well. And it was like you'd be a fool not to recommend some sort of equity-based investment because the stock market was doing very well. And then after 2008, then things changed. It was almost like a wake-up call. Like I can remember sitting down with somebody and a client at that time, and they just were not worried at all. They're like, nah, everything's fine. Everything's going to be great. And I'm just not worried about it. I'm not worried about the stock market taking, crashing or anything. And I think that was like, it might've been maybe 6 months from the time when when we saw I think it ended up being like a 38% or 40%, crash in stocks, and wiped a lot of people out. And I mean, stock market recovered since then because you see, if you held on to it, things came back. But essentially by then it wiped out the previous 10 years worth of gains. So if you were nearing retail, like if you were in your 20s or 30s, then you could sort of make the argument that, oh, well, I'll just hold on for another 10 years and then come back. But it took you a while to recover that. If you were retired or you were just retiring and you were trying to draw an income, on top of having lost all that money, then it was a very different story.
And it's really hard. And with an aging population like we have in the United States, there are more people that are on a fixed income. And a lot of people depend upon the money that they have in the IRA or the 401k to make up the difference between Social Security and what it costs to live.
Yeah.
So they were withdrawing X number of dollars a month.
Yeah.
And if you're over 70, I think it's 71 and a half now, you had to you were required to take out a certain amount of money. But there were people back then, and it appears to be like now that the same thing is repeating itself.
Yeah, so that's the kind of the worry that you see a sudden drop. In the S&P 500, you see a sudden drop of 10%. It's sort of like, okay, that's a little concerning, but maybe it'll bounce back. And if you see a 20% drop, then you're thinking, oh, well, okay, well that's a little worse, but maybe this is just like a big dip or like a big correction. It'll bounce way back up again. So I think the fear is that this is going to just keep going. And the reality is it could go one of two ways. Obviously, we could recover and go back up, or it could go down, which I think people are like, it's either going to go back up again or it's going to go down. There's a couple of things that are sort of driving this, and that's going to be, over the long term, corporate earnings always drive stock prices. They don't drive it in the short term, but eventually, if corporations don't have revenue, they don't have profits, there's nothing that's going to support the stock price. That's basic business. If you have a business with no revenue and no profits, you don't have any real value to your company. And it works, it works the same way for small business owners as it does for Apple. The difference is that Apple has billions of dollars in cash that they can use to buy back shares of their stock and make their stock price keep going up for a little while longer. Whereas a small business owner can't really do that. So that a lot of people are thinking, oh, this is just sort of we're sort of just kind of floating along here. I don't really have much of an opinion about that. I come at this from the perspective of, this is sort of the this shows the sort of this, and there's kind of another related story to this that shows kind of the value of insurance during this time, because insurance is sort of this quiet piece that people typically don't think a lot about, because the stock market is a lot more exciting. But insurance is that hedge against loss, and specifically talking about fixed annuities and whole life insurance. Those are the hedges against loss, against financial risk, against loss. So those only come into play, and people tend to only think about those, when things go wrong, which I guess in a sense makes sense, because that's what they're for, is when things go wrong. You want to have something that is there for you that's not, losing money. But there's a story about an insurance company recently. It's been in the news, Ohio National, and there's a lot of insurance agents, a lot of policyholders are sort of finding out the hard way that mixing insurance and investments in a particular way is very difficult to do, and oftentimes doesn't really work. And I don't know how familiar your audience is with what has been going on. A lot of this stuff has been in the news. It's like one of those things that this is like the one time in like the last couple of decades that the insurance industry has been in the news so often. Ohio National is a very old mutual life insurance company. A mutual insurance company is basically it's like a credit union almost, in the sense that the policyholders own the company, so there's no outside shareholders, which really makes people feel good about doing business with a company like that, because there's no competing interests. It's like if you buy a policy from the company, the management's interests are supposed to be aligned with yours, because you're instead of a stockholder, you're a stakeholder in the company, and it's that mutual ownership. So probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, Ohio National started selling variable annuities, which is a normal insurance product. It's basically like almost like a retirement account or a savings account with an insurance company. And a variable annuity invests in basically stocks. I mean, it's equity mutual funds. And the deal with the insurance company, the reason that they would sell that is they would say, well, we're gonna sell this annuity. We're gonna give you an investment in the stock market, and we're gonna do it for a pretty low cost. And we're gonna offer you the option for some additional guarantees. So instead of taking straight up stock market risk, so you could invest in stocks directly, but if you invest your money with us, you get to invest in the same kinds of mutual funds that you could buy somewhere else. But if you want to pay us a small fee, what we'll do is we will guarantee you a certain rate of return. It was called a guaranteed minimum accumulation benefit.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And so what happened was they sold a ton of these. Of course, if you tell people you can invest with us, it'll be just like investing in the stock market. And it is. I mean, the sub accounts in a variable annuity are essentially the same kinds of mutual funds you would find outside of the insurance company. So then they say, the worst you could do with us is, let's say, 5% interest. The best you can do is whatever the stock market does. And so they have these, guarantees that are kind of baked into the product. And what happened was those guarantees went sideways on them, and they became very, very expensive. And it got so expensive to offer those guarantees. The company basically they chewed through so much of their capital that they ended up having to be they were in desperate financial trouble, and they needed some help. And a Canadian company came in and basically assessed the value of the company and said, we'll give you $500 million to buy out all your policyholders, and then we'll own the company. And so a Canadian company now owns, a 100-year-old U.S. life insurance company. And
that's interesting.
So in this Canadian company is a company that manages a public, I think it manages like the Canadian Teachers Union pension plan. It's like a public pension. So you have essentially a company that manages a public pension now owning, a U.S. life insurance company. And it was interesting because this has been something that's been going on for a year or so now. It's been in, they've been negotiating a deal for a while now. And I think the lesson that a lot of policyholders walked away from this, hopefully they've walked away from this learning, is that it's really, really difficult and probably impossible to transform a equity risk, a stock market risk, into an insurance guarantee. And why is that significant? Because for I don't know how many decades have we been told that the stock market is a very safe place. Even though you're not guaranteed a certain rate of return, you can probably bank on an 8% return or a 10% return or whatever. And you'll see illustrations from, now I'm not saying everybody does this, but you'll see illustrations on the internet and elsewhere saying that, yeah, you should be able to withdraw 4%, 5%, whatever. I think some people have gotten away from the 8% withdrawal rates, but just saying that, returns, you shouldn't have any problems like drawing a really good income from your 401k or IRA and all that. Don't worry about it. And hopefully this is a wake-up call to people who, a lesson kind of from the insurance company, that when it went sideways on them, these are people who are experts in managing risk, and it went sideways on them. And so people who are doing it themselves, hopefully they're paying attention to this and watching and seeing that if they don't have, insurance where that's not risky or doesn't have that sort of risk baked into it, that if you can afford to lose money, fine. But if you don't have something that's sort of like a hedge against those financial losses, then there is a risk that I'm not saying it will happen, but there's always that risk that your retirement plan can go sideways on you. And it could get really nasty. It could get really bad.
Well, and right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but stock market's going down.
Yeah.
So people are losing, in some cases, significant amounts of money. The country is losing a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin is also going down. That was at one point, it was over $60,000 a coin. Now it's under 30.
Right. I think it's going towards 20, right?
That's what
I said, I think they say that's going towards 20 now, isn't it?
I haven't looked in the last couple of days. That's why I've never gotten involved with Bitcoin, because it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Because you can go to bed on a Wednesday night and it could be at 60 and or $60,000, and you could wake up Thursday morning and it could be at 35.
Yes.
And if you bought it at 60, that money's gone until it goes back up again, if it goes back up again.
Yeah.
But so I guess my question is, other than gold and silver, because that's not all that great of an investment long term either, where can people go to protect their investments that they've got, rather than doing what in 2008, my mother, who had a sizable estate, and it went down and went down and went down and went down. She listened to Fox News, and they said it's going to bankrupt, it's going to go down and down and down. So she sold at its lowest level.
Oh, news.
Yes, and yeah, so she lost a great deal of money, but then she turned that all in and put it into bonds.
Yeah.
And then she never put it back into the stock market when it started going up again. Right. So when it was at 1.8 thousand, and she missed the entire upswing when it got up to 32,000.
Yeah.
So it cost her literally probably $2 million.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the problem with saying, I think that's probably the problem with trying to, having this, I don't know what you'd call it, but trying to make these blanket statements like you should invest in this, but not in this. Right. I mean, to me, that's almost a recipe for disaster, because in your story there, it's like, yeah, if you switch from equities into bonds, let's say, but the equity markets come back up, you cashed out at a loss, you could miss the ride back up again.
And you will. Yeah.
And you will, right? At the same time, very few people put all their money in equities, because, during times when there is a stock market correction, that's usually the time when you need cash.
Right.
Or for something, whether it's to buy more stock, or whether it's because the stock market tanked and we're going to a recession and you lost your job, or your business is not doing so well right now and you need cash. Those kinds of things tend to correlate with each other. The economy's not doing well. That's when you need money, but that's when you don't have it available, right? So people, let's say like people, and by the way, when I talk about stocks, I'm not making a recommendation for or against, but just as an example, just to people get and I guess a tangible idea of this, or a specific example of this is people who were invested in Netflix. I think maybe, and I don't know how long ago it was. I'd have to look at it again, but I was seeing that at one point it was worth $700 a share, and then all of a sudden it literally just fell off a cliff and went from 700 to like 199 a share. I mean, that's a huge drop. And if you happen to be invested in all that, and you decided, if that was, I'm not saying that people should or shouldn't invest in Netflix, or I mean, that's not the point of this. It's just that if somebody were, like a hypothetical investor, were invested that, if they went from 700 a share to 200 a share, odds are that by the time they hit $200 a share, they're going to probably be pretty worried about their investments. They're not going to have everything in Netflix. They're going to have things spread around a little bit. They may, a lot of people invest in like S&P 500 index funds these days. But even as the S&P 500 goes down, and people have been losing some people have been kind of pushed out of work or lost their job for one reason or another. That's when they tend to need money. And if you just lost 60 grand, that's 60 grand that you don't have that you might need. And so I think that's where the insurance piece comes in. And if you have a pretty good financial plan, you're going to have some money set aside in, something like whole life insurance. I'm biased, but that's what I do for a living. But you're going to have some money set aside in something like that. Maybe it's a savings account. Maybe it's bank CDs. If it's my business, I would say whole life insurance. But you're going to have some money that's set aside that's going to be a hedge against something that's a little more volatile, or something that could lose money.
It's even crazier too, because if you have stuff in cash, well, inflation is now currently 8%.
Yeah.
So your buying power is even less with the cash. So even cash isn't safe because you're losing money on your cash.
Well, yes, under inflationary pressures, your buying power goes down. So there's actually an interesting news piece about this I was reading about, along with a lot of the companies that have experienced these sudden, a lot of companies have missed their earnings for this first quarter, and one of the companies that I was reading about was Target. And it just happened to be, it was almost like a throwaway comment. The CEO of Target was saying that inventories were up, like, I think 40% more than last year.
Uh-oh. So,
which means that they actually have like, I think it was like furniture, electronics, and there was something else. But there's certain inventories that are up, like people have stopped buying certain items. So this has always been the thing. Like, if people have been saying like, oh yeah, inflation. And my response to that is, okay, you're seeing inflation in like two major areas that hurt a lot: gas prices, oil prices, and food. As you spend more money in gasoline, let's say, or food, you're spending less money somewhere else. So if you're putting
money,
exactly right. So if you have to put an extra $200 in your tank every week or every month or whatever, that's $200 less that you can spend somewhere else. So people are buying more. Let's say they're buying more gasoline, but they're buying fewer home goods at Target. I don't know that that's the case, but I'm saying that's a trade-off. Like, you have less money, you're not spending it somewhere. So Target is seeing inventories climb, and then demand is simultaneously falling off. So supply is going up, demand is falling down. Guess what comes next? Not inflation,
deflation.
Yeah, or disinflation, right? So you're not, if you've got, before, let's say you were a furniture store, you're a Target or whatever, and you used to sell, I don't know, maybe 20 couches a month. I don't know how many they sell, but if let's say 20 couches a month, and all of a sudden you've got now 40 couches, and you're selling, instead of 20 couches, you're selling 10. I mean, at some point you're not going to be able to sell them for the same price. You've got a backlog of couches and not too many buyers.
Right. Well, and it's the same thing I would think, with gasoline, because I filled up yesterday. I live in the Seattle area, and it was $5.50
Yeah.
for regular,
Hmm.
uh, and stuff, and so I'm not driving anywhere near what I used to drive
Yeah.
because I don't have to. I feel sorry for people that are commuting a long way to work because they have no choice.
Yeah.
They've got to drive, and but it will affect long term the cars we buy.
Mhm.
The big trucks are not going to sell like they were, because remember the what was it called, the Hummer?
Oh yeah.
The
Yeah.
Hummer,
The Hummer that
the
got like 8 miles to the gallon.
yeah, and in 2008 that went away,
Hmm.
or before, because nobody wanted to buy them anymore because they cost too much money to operate,
I
and
knew
so
somebody who owned one for like, I think he owned it for like 2 weeks, and then took it back and decided he didn't want it anymore.
I mean, it was a nice ride and all, but goodness gracious, it was like driving a bus. It was expensive
Hmm.
to operate, and so these things tend to balance themselves out over time.
Yeah.
But it's sad. So I guess, since you're an insurance expert, is there a way to take some money that you have in equities? Although, like in my case, it's way too late. I'm
Yeah.
more than 20% down. If I liquidate my equities, then I'm never going to get that 20% back.
Yeah.
Of course, that 20% could turn into 30%, could turn into 40%. Who the hell knows where it's going to go?
So what were you saying?
So the question is there a viable place in the insurance industry where somebody could hedge, could could put their money to hedge against loss in the stock market than wherever else they would have it?
So in insurance, I mean, I don't give investment advice about if somebody has stock holdings or something like that. I don't give advice about whether or not they should buy more, hold on to investments, or sell the investments that they have. But I can say that if your financial plan is probably not complete if you do not own at least some life insurance, and if I'm being honest, some whole life insurance. And I think that makes some people a little, I think that makes some people
Queasy, queasy.
a little queasy, right? So I know that it triggers some investment advisors when I say that, because there is there are people that think that nobody should be buying whole life insurance at all, and I'm over here saying, yeah, I think that without having at least a little bit of whole life insurance as a backstop, you probably don't have a complete financial plan. What you have is like a house without a foundation.
That would be a problem if you live in Louisiana with hurricanes coming, and
Yeah, anywhere.
this is liable to be a big hurricane because we've got the war in Ukraine. We've got, which I suppose it's affecting global gas supplies, which is why gas is so expensive.
Mhm.
Um, which I think is there are people that would tell you that it's all manipulated, but I'm not going to go there today.
Those
But
are, those are that's there's a I mean, we could go down the conspiracy rabbit hole if you want.
no, I don't think so. But and then we've still got the pandemic around. One of my associates, her whole family just came down with COVID.
Yep.
And so it's still out there, and there are still people dying from it.
Sure.
Now, I wanted to ask you though, since you were in the life insurance agents or insurance business,
Yeah.
more people are dying. How's that affecting you guys?
Yeah. So I it from 2019, before the pandemic started, um, roughly, I'd say between 2 and 3 million people die every year. I mean, that's considered normal. And then afterwards, we started seeing excess mortality. Excess mortality meaning an amount over the quote unquote normal, right? Excess mortality was, I think, in 2020 was something like, the CDC had this official number of, it was somewhere around 350,000, if I remember correctly. And then it sort of was the same. It was a couple thousand higher in 2021. And then in 2000, and now there's provisional counts. So the official numbers for 2020, for 2021 probably won't be, there probably won't be a final count until the end of this year. But the provisional counts show that it's excess mortality it's roughly the same. So it's not like going up and up and up each year. It's not like each year is getting worse. It's sort of, you see this big bump in excess mortality. It's a couple thousand more in 2021, and then 2022 remains to be seen. And the way that the insurance industry looks at this, there was an insurance company, One America. Their CEO kind of unintentionally became famous when he was giving a webinar. And I think it was a local chamber of commerce meeting or something like that in Indiana, because that's where the company is headquartered. And he unintentionally became famous when a bunch of like conservative bloggers and media kind of picked up this webinar and like spread it all over the internet, basically of him saying that that mortality in the group insurance market, the group life insurance market, rose 40% from 2019. And that's a shock, because a 10% rise is like a 1 in 200 year event. So a 40% rise is like 4 times a 1 in 200 year event, which is really scary. I mean, if you just look at on the surface of it, that's a really scary event. But with group term insurance, group insurance is usually term life insurance. And on the individual side, so that's group insurance. On the individual or what they call it, a private or individual life insurance side, mortality was up some, depending on the company, on average, maybe about 25 to 30%, which is still high. It's not, I mean, it's not 40%, but it's still up a significant amount. And some of those were due to COVID. Most of the COVID claims, when I talked to the carriers, a lot of the COVID claims were people in their 70s and 80s. So I think the word that I got was about 80% of the people where the death claim was marked because of COVID, those people were in their 70s and 80s. And the thing with One America was, he was saying, mortality in the 18 to 64 age range, that went up 40%. So then the mystery is, why are those people dying? Because this was this was after the vaccine was introduced. People were, getting the jab at work and all this other stuff. So why are these people dying? Why is 18 to 64? That's the younger age. If people are dying when they're in their 70s and 80s, it's not like you're jumping up and down and cheering for that, but you also kind of see it 70s, 80s. It's sort of normal mortality age.
It's expected.
Right.
And a lot of people died of COVID that would have died of something else within a year or two.
You do. Unfortunately, you do. And unfortunately, it happens. But in the 18 to 64 age range, you don't typically see that. Young people usually grow to be old people. It's just how it is.
You'd like that to be the case. Yes.
Yeah. So when you see mortality go up in that age range, you get a little concerned about that. And it's not, some of them were COVID deaths, but a lot of them were not COVID deaths. A lot of them were, what they were seeing was not like other health issues. One of the big ones was substance abuse.
I was going to mention that, because did you see the report recently that it was either 2020 or 2021 that the number of COVID deaths was higher, the number of opiate deaths was higher than ever recorded, and it was like some insane number, like 1 million people.
Overdose. Deaths from overdoses skyrocketed, and a lot of
that's because of COVID.
What's that?
And I think a lot of that's because of COVID, because people were just sitting around thinking, I don't know, what do you want to do? I don't know, what do you want to do? Well, let's pop a couple of pills.
So I'm really careful about assigning when somebody says this was due to me. When somebody says somebody died from COVID, it's they got COVID, they got really sick
and died,
respiratory illness, and they succumbed to the illness. When we're talking about people ODing or committing suicide, they have mental health issues, stuff like that, And it was because they were locked in their house for an entire year and were not allowed to go outside. I know this is going to be offensive to some people, but that's the government. When you've got government saying you're not allowed to go out, you're not allowed to work, you got to be on lockdown, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't work, you can't do this, and people get bored and then they overdose on drugs. And I'm not saying that it's government's fault that people OD'd on drugs or whatnot, but there isn't, there's an element where the government lockdowns in certain cities and certain states, it drove a lot of behaviors that otherwise probably wouldn't happen. And
no, that's absolutely true. And I think whether or not government is to blame, they were kind of in an impossible situation because they didn't know how bad it was going to get. The hospitals were filling up and all that kind of stuff. So, it's one of those things. It's kind of like what we're experiencing in the financial market right now. It
yeah.
all came together as a perfect storm.
Yeah, so I think early on nobody really knew. I mean, for the first couple of months, when it was declared, when the pandemic was declared, nobody really knew. They didn't know what the mortality rate was. It was like data was trickling in. We're waiting to see like what was happening. Probably halfway through 2020, we had a lot of data. CDC had some data, enough data to be reliable. Life insurance actuaries were starting to make predictions. They already had the data. They had enough data assembled that they could then start seeing a mortality trend, a mortality picture. So they knew that if you were as an example, they knew that if you were under age 50, and early on, I'm talking probably 4 months into the pandemic, your risk of dying from COVID, if you were under age 50, and this was before the vaccine, by the way. So your risk of dying was 1 in 3,000, roughly 1 in 3,000. So the risk was pretty low. And then I think as time went on, I think that those mortality statistics changed and it settled somewhere around like 1 in 2,000, which is still pretty low. And so those numbers were known. So I would say probably after the first 6 months or so, a lot of the statistics, a lot of the data that came in, we had some pretty decent mortality numbers. And definitely by 2021, we had mortality figures and we knew kind of what the risk was. Whether or not it was publicized kind of depended on, what sources you were reading. And the data was always there from the CDC. In 2021 and on, the data was there, at least from the CDC, it was.
Yeah. So what do you think? Was it overdose that drove a lot of the deaths, or was it other things as well?
So what One America, what the CEO of One America had said was there were 3 primary non-COVID causes, and what they were seeing in their own death certificates kind of matched what the CDC was saying, what the data from the CDC was saying, was that it was a lot of ODs from substance abuse, that it was people not seeking medical care because you could speculate as to why, they weren't seeing, but people not going in for routine medical care that they needed to have, whether it was surgeries, whether it was going to see the doctor for some other medical condition and getting proper treatment, they weren't doing it. And so they died prematurely from a preventable sort of situation where they could have gotten treatment that they never got. And those were like the big factors that played into that. And
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that the only other thing is that now going into 2022 with the insurance across the insurance industry, it's sort of generally accepted now. I mean, there's not really a debate about this anymore, that COVID is now a mortality event. They look at it, the insurance business, the life insurance business in particular, sees COVID as a mortality event, meaning it's a sort of like this one-time thing. There's going to be some ancillary things that happen afterwards, but they see it as this one-time bump, and it's going to come up, it's going to level off, it's going to go down. The longer, what they're more concerned about is a mortality trend of opioid abuse and substance abuse and things like that will hurt mortality. So they're actually more concerned about drug abuse and overdoses as a long-term mortality trend. They're not worried so much about COVID anymore.
One of the things that I think is still kind of on the edges and is needs to be looked at is that this new thing that they're calling long COVID,
Yeah.
where people are sick for a very long time, and they don't know whether or not they're going to get significantly better,
Hmm.
or if that's going to be if it's a permanent life changing event.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard anything from the insurance companies. They have looked at stuff like that, and it doesn't seem. I mean, data can always change, I guess, in the future, but they have not seen anything that they're worried about in terms of mortality.
And it's not going to be mortality. I don't think that's going to be the issue. I think it's going to be quality of life.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I don't know a lot about that aspect of it, but yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's fascinating that because the insurance companies, it's their business to know how many people are dying. Because
Exactly. That's the one thing, like when people talk to me about mortality statistics and, especially when it comes to like COVID, and I've talked to actuaries about like life insurance actuaries, because I didn't want to make guesses about this either. So I talked to the guys that actually do the, all the mortality calculations on this. And that's where I got a lot of the information about, how from the carriers, and then also just talking to the carriers directly, being on the conference calls with, upper management, stuff like that, and being, just getting their take on it, what they're seeing in terms of their mortality experience.
Exactly. So David, I want to make sure we get your information out. If somebody wants to contact you in regards to talking to you about term or whole life or any of the other instruments that you work with, how do they do that?
Yeah, so they can go to monogenics.com, mongenix.com. I have a ton of information on the website. So if people just go to the website, there's a section on there that's all about life insurance planning and kind of gives you a big, broad overview of how life insurance planning works and kind of the way that I do it. The way that I do life insurance planning. And then if people want more information than what's freely available, they can join the email list. And the email list goes deeper in and is it's a daily email list. It's kind of like, I don't know, talk radio, but in email form, I guess is the best way I could think to explain it.
That's a good thing, because you can attach different things, different articles to it, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So that's a good idea. So how do they get it? And that they can get that on your website as well.
And if you just go to monogenics.com, you can the email sign up is right there on the homepage, or you can sort of click on the menu and you can navigate all over the website and kind of access whatever you want.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm sorry that this is happening to us, because I don't know. And right now, sitting here, what is it? The 20th of May, 2022. We have no earthly idea what it's going to look like in the next year.
Yeah, that's a hard one. A lot of people are worried about inflation. A lot of people are worried about gas prices going up. They're worried about food prices going up. And I think that this is sort of a unique kind of, somebody had asked me about this just recently. It's something that my wife and I have been actually planning for a little while. But I think the insurance business has the insurance model, how the insurance industry works, sort of has a lesson for how to deal with instability in prices that people are seeing. So, to take the example of people that are having problems right now with like food shortages or grocery prices that are sort of like all over the place. One of the things that I think has been a problem is people have seen, you go to the store one week and, maybe something's available and then, something is not available. Like, I think meat is a big one. Like the price of chicken has gone through the roof. And it's stuff like this that I think it creates a certain sort of like, it seems like in America, this kind of thing shouldn't happen. Like food instability should not, or food insecurity should not be a thing in the United States.
Do you know there were real recently there were people that were trying to find formula for their baby
Yeah,
and couldn't get the formula.
yeah, baby food. Yeah, I mean, just being able to feed your child, and that's really bizarre to me that we have food shortages and food insecurity in the United States.
This is the first time in my lifetime that I can remember. I remember back in the 70s we had the long lines for the gas shortages and gas rationing and that kind of thing, but we've never had a time when where you couldn't go to the store and buy any toilet paper. I
Yeah,
thought
the great
weird.
toilet paper fiasco, right, of 2020.
Yeah, and it's like, why? I get why toilet paper, but that's one of the necessities of life. But I suppose, but we are living in extraordinary times, and I if I think if somebody can benefit by talking to you about an insurance piece to kind of hedge their bet on both inflation and also the stock market going down and stuff like that. I think you can help them. So I encourage them to go there.
Yeah, I mean, so the life insurance piece is, I think, one part of the puzzle. For some people, I hate to say this, but I do think for some people it probably is too late to start planning. I know you and I have talked before about this, and you had asked me this question before, if it's ever too late to start planning.
Yep.
And at that time, I had said no. That for the most part, you could. I mean, age-wise, it's not no restrictions really. I mean, there's a point at which you get too old to qualify for insurance, but there's usually something that can be done. And I think my opinion about that has changed a little bit with. Um, I'd have to qualify that a little bit more. And I think because now, especially with where we are with inflation and with food shortages and things like that, for some people, their priority is going to be, how do I eat?
Yep.
And they're sort of painted themselves into a corner and they don't really have an option. It's going to be like kind of hand to mouth. It's going to be like month to month, for some people, week to week or day to day. And that's really unfortunate. I hate to see people in that position because it doesn't need to be that way. Especially not, I just keep thinking the United States is a great country. It should not be this way in the United States.
And I've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. There are 16 million kids that go to bed hungry every night in the greatest country in the world, and we should not that should not be allowed.
I think that a lot of people shortchange themselves.
I agree with that.
I think a lot of people shortchange themselves, and I'm not here to tell people what they should and shouldn't do, but I do think that people prioritize certain things over other things, and they shortchange themselves in the long run. They sort of take a short-term mentality. And just as an example, so with the whole food shortage thing, a lot of people, and it's in the news, and the news is, fear porn, basically. I mean, you watch that stuff and you're going to be scared. If you watch too much news, it's going to give you an anxiety attack after a while.
It is.
But some people are not some people are not suffering from, like, some people are not seeing the effects of like food shortages, because they've sort of adopted a savings mentality, but with food, so that people have started accumulating. I know people who've done this. They've accumulated food like you would accumulate dollars. And what they've done is essentially built up like a food bank, so to speak. And so they've, and there was this phenomenon for a while of people like buying these huge chest freezers and buying freezer meat and then stockpiling stuff in a pantry and stuff like that. And so, what they had done was sort of overbought. They overbought a lot of food. A normal person wouldn't need like 20 cans of beans or whatever, but they bought 20 cans of beans, right? And now they've got enough to last them for a year and a half, maybe 5 years or whatever, unless you really like eating beans, right? So they have a lot of food that they can draw on. So if the price of beans spike, doesn't matter. They've got food stores, right? And
Right.
so people have done that, and so they're not really seeing the effects because it's sort of blunting that effect of the volatility in food prices and also just the outright shortages. And yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, but a lot of it has to do with the supply chain, and
Mhm.
it's like one thing leads to another. As
Yep.
an example, if there's a run on beans, there's
Yep.
also is a run on Beano, and if you have a run on Beano, it's going to raise the price of Beano, so you don't fart as much when you're eating your beans and stuff. So,
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
so
But
so now we have a Beano crisis in the
we have
country,
a
and it's all
veto
because
price.
of beans.
But I think that's sort of the benefit of planning out in advance, right? So people, if so, before all this started, right? So this is kind of gets back to that concept of building up a food storage, like overbuying groceries, for example, is sort of like the same. There's a corollary there. That's how, I mean, when I first heard of people doing this, it struck me that this is the same kind of principles that insurance companies operate on. When you pile money into an insurance policy, you are essentially overfunding the policy. You don't actually need, and especially in like a whole life policy, you don't actually need, to pay, or the insurance company doesn't need the premium that you're paying to pay the immediate death benefit. What they do with it is you're sort of overstocking savings, and it builds up a savings inside the policy. And so later when you need it, it can be drawn out, and it can also be, and it's also used to, hold down the cost of insurance so that those insurance costs don't get out of hand. In the same way that people, and it effectively controls the volatility of that mortality pricing that would otherwise be there if you bought like a annually renewable term. Every year the price goes up on a term insurance contract, and it eventually becomes unaffordable. In the same way, people sort of, whether or not they really understand insurance or not, that principle carries across. It's a principle whether or not people understand it or not, or whether they know how it applies in different scenarios. People have sort of, whether it's conscious or unconsciously, sort of, applied that to, hey, I'm going to overbuy on groceries, and I'm going to protect myself in case, meat spikes to, $6 or $8 a pound or something like that. I'm going to have some in my freezer. And in that way, I can draw off that. So if it's available, I can buy it. And if it's not available, I always just draw off it. But people started doing that like 5 years ago. They started before the crisis hit. And so now, yeah, they've built up so much, or they did it like a year before the crisis hit. So now they've got enough to last them 2 years or 3 years or whatever. If it's like, as long as it's stored properly or whatnot, they have enough that now they're sort of just sitting on, this store that they have built up.
How much storage do you need for meat if it's going to last 2 years? That would be
Big
that's
storage, a
that's a
big
lot of
storage,
chicken.
commercial vacuum. But I've seen, like, if you go on to like the hunting, there's like hunting forums. If you go on to hunting forums and survivalist forums and stuff like that, there's guys on there. They're really serious about it. They're like the guys who are really serious that I've seen. They talk about going out and hunting, and they get a deer, and then they have like a commercial vacuum sealer that they use to seal all the meat up, and then it's stored. And like, it's funny because you look at it, you laugh at those guys like, you're an idiot, right? Nobody's laughing at those guys now.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. If you want venison, then that's how you get it. Is go to your neighbor who's got a stockpile full of it. But
Go to your neighbor who's the crazy gun nut who's been hunting for the last 20 years and beg him for some food.
well, and that's the other thing is that with the proliferation of guns that we have in this country,
Yeah.
that everybody, and then we have events like this, and
Yeah.
we've got 335 million people,
Yeah.
and we have 390 million guns,
Oh,
and
we've
then
got so many guns in this country.
they go buy more because
Yeah,
it's like
people just buy more. There's more guns. That's sort of like Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle had Dave. You're familiar with Dave Chappelle, the comedian?
oh sure, oh
Yeah.
sure.
So Dave Chappelle had a really funny stand-up bit about this, because he's very liberal. He's a very liberal comedian, and he had a very funny bit about this, and he said, in this country we have the First Amendment, so you talk out your problems, you try to solve them in a reasonable, rational like manner. And he says we have the Second Amendment just in case the first one doesn't work out. So
that is so true. And then we've got, I don't know, David, we could talk for hours about the problems that we have because they're deep. Sure. They are multi-generational.
Oh yeah.
And they've got to get fixed. And we're running out of time. We've got to fix it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, anyway, but David Lewis has been our guest, and I thank you for being here, young man. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, same. Thank you for having me on.
You betcha. And your information one more time when somebody wants to get a hold of you.
Sure. Absolutely. If you want more information about life insurance or just general information, or you want to go deeper into how life insurance planning can work for you, my website is monogenics.com. And you can either get on the email list or just browse the free content on the website.
Now, how'd you come up with monogenics?
That's a long story. I don't know if we have
next time you're on, I'm going to ask you, how'd you come up with monogenics?
Yeah,
and we'll go from there. So,
okay.
Again, David Lewis, look him up, monogenics.com, and you can find all about him. So. Thank you very much, David, for being here. Wait right there. I'll be right back.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for enjoying this episode all the way to the end. Please give us a like and subscribe to this channel. This has been a production of kmmedia.pro. Please visit our website, oddly enough, named kmmedia.pro, for more details about us and our mission, which is to provide great positive programming designed to inspire us all. I'm Kevin McDonald, and I'm proud of these shows, and I truly hope that you'll like them and share them with friends and family. So on behalf of our entire team, remember, be kind to each other because each other's all we've got. We'll see you next time.